Good morning, you're watching Daybreak. I'm Katie Wilson. Let's see the top stories making the headlines this morning. President Trump says Washington is holding what he called very friendly talks with Iran. At least 7 killed in Russian drone attack on Ukraine as Zelensky heads to Washington. Europe faces a heatwave as France battles wildfires, with the blaze moving within miles of Bordeaux. Thanks for joining us. We begin with the conflict between the US and Iran. President Trump says Iran is ready to make a deal, but Tehran insists there are no direct negotiations. The conflicting messages come as both sides pause military action. Here's more.
US President Donald Trump says Washington is holding what he called very friendly talks with Iran and suggested a possible deal could be within reach. Speaking at a rally in Michigan, Trump argued that the military campaign had forced Tehran back to the negotiating table.
No, you can't bribe them. You got to beat them, and we're beating the hell out of them. But we'll see how it turns out. Right now, there are very friendly negotiations going on. And by the way, how good is our Navy with a blockade? How good? Not one boat gets it.
But Iran strongly rejected that claim. Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghaei said there are no direct negotiations with the United States. He accused Washington of violating previous understandings and said Iran would only act to protect its national interests.
No agreement can be unilaterally implemented. This is natural. Therefore, Iran has ceased fulfilling its commitments. When the time becomes right, we will discuss future development directions. But one thing is certain: Iran will never compromise on its national interests and security principles.
The US paused its strikes after mediating countries asked President Trump to allow more time for diplomacy. Iran has also stopped its attacks, following nearly 2 weeks of exchanges that effectively ended the ceasefire agreed in June. Markets reacted positively to signs of possible de-escalation, with oil prices falling more than 9% during Monday's trading before recovering some ground.
Well, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington for his first face-to-face meeting with President Trump since the conflict with Iran began. The meeting comes as tensions remain high between the two leaders over a disagreement on Middle East policy. It also carries political significance for Netanyahu ahead of October's election. The UK Prime Minister Andy Burnham has reaffirmed Britain's support for Ukraine during his first meeting with a foreign leader since entering Downing Street. Speaking alongside Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, Burnham pledged continued backing for Kyiv for as long as it takes. Zainab Farashzadeh reports.
UK Prime Minister Andy Burnham has used his first meeting with a foreign leader since entering Downing Street to reaffirm Britain's support for Ukraine. Speaking alongside Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at a naval base in Portsmouth, Burnham said the UK was with Ukraine 100% and promised continued backing for as long as it takes. The Prime Minister said the visit was intended to send a clear message to Kyiv that Britain's support would remain unchanged. Zelensky said Ukraine's relationship with the UK was stronger than ever, adding that he hoped the ties between the two countries would remain strong during and after the war. During the visit, Burnham announced that Britain would share the technology behind its new Stone Cloak electronic warfare system with Ukraine. The system uses small jammers designed to protect drones from detection. And Downing Street says the technology could help Ukrainian forces carry out operations more effectively. The two leaders also met more than 200 Ukrainian troops taking part in exercise Daybreak, a multinational maritime training exercise focused on strengthening military capabilities and counter-mine operations. Burnham said Britain would continue pushing for a full and unconditional ceasefire, while insisting that any future negotiations must include Ukraine and a strong European voice. Zelensky's visit comes after Burnham invited him to Britain during one of his first calls as Prime Minister. The Ukrainian president is expected to travel to Washington next for talks with U.S. officials as efforts continue to secure further support and discuss possible steps towards bringing the war to an end. Zainab Farisata, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Well, joining us now to discuss Zelensky's visit to the UK is David Kiroshenko, Associate Research Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Thank you for joining us this morning. Now, what is the significance of Zelensky being Andy Burnham's first international visitor since entering number 10?
Yeah, I think it's a reflection of the growing role that Ukraine is playing in Europe's defense and the fact that the relationship between Ukraine and its European partners is bidirectional. At the start of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine was receiving aid and support from Western states and still is, but now Ukraine is increasingly offering a lot in return, namely its drone technology, its battlefield lessons, data that it's getting from the war, being able to train autonomous systems, and also for European startups and manufacturers being able to take their equipment, their technology, test it on the battlefield, figure out what works, what doesn't, iterate, and develop high-tech systems that would help Britain and others prepare for warfare in the 21st century. And so both countries are increasingly benefiting from the relationship. And again, Ukraine as a security provider is being able to flex on the international stage. And it's quite telling that the first leader being able to visit the new prime minister is President Zelensky, and was amongst the first people that the prime minister had a phone call with, is a reflection of, I think, Ukraine's growing status and the deepening partnership between both countries.
And do you think that was why Zelensky accepted the invitation so readily? What do you think Zelensky's aims for this visit was? I think,
well, the UK, since the start of the full-scale invasion, has been one of Ukraine's strongest backers. According to Boris Johnson, the French and the Germans were in disbelief, and the Germans wanted the war to end rather quickly, regardless of the outcome, and the French were just in disbelief. And we saw in the initial months Macron constantly trying to call Putin and seek to an end, whereas the UK was focused on helping Ukraine defend itself, rallying support. So there's always been a really strong relationship between the UK and Ukraine, and the UK has been amongst the leading countries or on the receiving end of Russian hybrid attacks. So both countries are acutely aware of the threat that Russia poses, and I think for Zelensky, the conduit that the UK serves, both with the US and other Western states, Zelensky sees that Ukraine can benefit from that, and there's only things to be gained from leveraging the relationship with the United Kingdom, and thinks he saw it as a no-brainer to accept the invitation and continue showing that both countries are committed in the long term to the defense of Europe and aiding Ukraine's cause and fighting back against Russia.
And this is the fourth Prime Minister that Zelensky has seen in the UK since the full-scale invasion. To what extent will a change of leadership potentially change that relationship, or do you think the fact that Zelensky was the first leader is an indication that the relationship between the UK and Ukraine will continue as it always has done?
Yeah, there's certainly been continuity between each prime minister that has taken office in the UK, and I think the change or area to focus on rather is what the prime minister will do with the army or the UK's defense in general, how much they're going to invest and spend, and I think that's also going to reflect in the relationship with Ukraine and how much they invest there. But in general, I think the trajectory remains unchanged, and the UK being able to project such strong support for Ukraine will have an impact on the war long term. I think the Russians have thought for years now that if they fought a war of attrition and attempted to grind the Ukrainians down, the Europeans would just give up and abandon supporting Ukraine. But the stronger that the West is, the stronger that the UK is and the rest of Europe, and the more that it can project strength in supporting Ukraine, the more likely that the Russians will see is that their cause and efforts to prevail on the battlefield will bring no results, and the Russians will have to come to the negotiating table sometime soon. So as long as that continuity continues, Europe remains committed to the long term and supporting Ukraine, the more favorable it will be for Europe's long-term defense. As the Russians continue to try to get more aggressive, the more desperate their forces are on the battlefield.
And you're giving us an indication there of how you think the Kremlin are reacting to this visit. What about the other leaders in Europe, which, like you say, haven't always been aligned with the UK on their policy towards Ukraine? How do you think they're reacting to Zelensky getting that first invitation?
Yes, I mean, on the surface, a lot of these European leaders talk about being committed to wider European defense and industries working with one another. But in reality, it's still quite fragmented. Cooperation isn't where it should be. And a lot of these states have different interests. I think if the French, for example, they're big proponents of in any of these arms deals or security pacts that they source exclusively European equipment, such as providing aid to Ukraine, whereas some of the other states, including Germany, have less stringent requirements. And so with that shift or difference in opinion, it certainly offers room for Ukraine to work bilaterally with some of these countries. And the stronger relationship is with the UK, perhaps the greater the incentive for countries like France and Germany to try to step it up and improve ties with Ukraine and their respective investments.
Now, just to finish off, I want to talk a bit more about British audiences who are very familiar with Andy Burnham's domestic policies over the years, but not necessarily his foreign policies. What signals do you think this visit is sending about what kind of leader Burnham is going to be in terms of foreign policy, particularly towards Ukraine?
Yeah, I think initially there was questions around what he was going to do and just how much ability he had in flexing his foreign policy capabilities. But I think it's sending a clear signal that he intends to steer his tenure as prime minister increasingly on foreign policy, and with the most important security issue right now in Europe being the Russia-Ukraine war. And by signaling that he's going to only increase investment and strengthen ties with Ukraine, it shows that it's a core interest for him. And I think it puts the UK on the right track. I think it would be a big concern if the UK is one of the leading defense supporters of Ukraine, did not signal that foreign policy was a top interest. And I think in the long term, again, it would signal to the Kremlin that there would be cracks in Western support for Ukraine. And so I think it's the right checking of the boxes and sends the right signals. And it all adds to the positive momentum that Ukraine is seeing on the battlefield right now.
Thank you very much for joining us on the programme this morning and for giving us your analysis. That's all very interesting.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to go to a short break now, and when I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, you're watching Daybreak. Now let's take a look at the global stories. At least 7 people have been killed and more than 20 others injured after Russian strikes hit frontline communities in eastern Ukraine. The attacks targeted several frontline areas with homes and civilian infrastructure coming under heavy drone and artillery fire. Meanwhile, Russian officials said a Ukrainian drone strike killed 1 person in a border region, while an apartment building near Moscow was hit in a separate drone attack. Authorities said air defences intercepted dozens of drones over the wider Moscow region. While Romania has expelled a Russian diplomat over repeated drone incursions during attacks on neighbouring Ukraine, the Russian ambassador was summoned and shown debris recovered on Romanian territory. Romania shot down 3 drones between Friday and Sunday, with the latest incident marking the 33rd Russian drone incursion since the war began. Bucharest said the breaches threatened Romania's sovereignty and security. Previously, a Russian drone hit a residential building, injuring 2 people. Romania later closed the Russian consulate in Constanța and expelled the consul general. President Zelensky is set to meet US senators in Washington on Tuesday, with all 100 members of the Senate invited to an evening gathering. The high-level meeting on Capitol Hill are expected to reinforce US support for Ukraine as senators weigh one of the most significant Russian sanctions packages in recent months. The Senate is also expected to begin voting on a bipartisan sanctions bill. The legislation seeks to curb Russia's energy revenues that help finance its war in Ukraine.
So I think we need to sit and speak.
The Kremlin says it remains open to fresh proposals as diplomatic efforts continue over the war in Ukraine. Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman was responding to reports that US and Ukrainian officials had discussed presenting a possible air ceasefire to Moscow. The Kremlin said it had received no specific details ahead of Tuesday's planned meeting between Trump and Zelensky in Washington.
For our part, we reaffirm our readiness for a political and diplomatic settlement of the Ukrainian crisis, something we have never renounced. I even gave examples of this today. But it should be based on the understandings reached, those in Alaska. We again confirm our readiness to consider possible discussions, proposals, and ideas. No one on our side has ever refused that.
A blistering summer has fueled a wave of destructive wildfires across Western Europe, testing emergency services and forcing mass evacuations. France and Spain are now bracing for another spell of extreme heat.
Firefighters in southwestern France have made progress against massive wildfires threatening Bordeaux. But authorities warn that rising temperatures and strong winds could reverse those gains. The blazes have destroyed about 42,000 hectares near the Atlantic coast, forcing more than 200,000 residents and holidaymakers to evacuate and disrupting rail services. Around 2,500 firefighters, supported by aircraft and military personnel, have been deployed. One fire in the Landes region has been contained, while another in Gironde remains intense. President Emmanuel Macron visited Bordeaux, where he thanked emergency crews and said France would examine its response once the immediate danger had passed.
We will review the lessons learned, and I personally guarantee that we will keep improving as we have after every crisis. But we prepared together in advance. A tremendous amount of work was carried out with reinvestment across all civilian and military sectors. Right now we must stay united and focused on action. Women and men are risking everything to protect others and fight the fire. All we must do is help them.
Residents said clearer skies on Monday had brought some relief, although many remain prepared to leave at short notice.
Yes, we are climate migrants, evacuees in any case. We evacuated the Cap Ferret Peninsula as early as Thursday evening. We came to take refuge in the Bordeaux area, and now we are waiting for a potential return. Every day we pray that we'll be able to go home.
The crisis has also spread across Spain, where around 100,000 people have been ordered to evacuate or seek shelter. Several major fronts remain active, including a blaze in Avila, described as the largest in Spain's recent history. International crews and aircraft have joined the response as firefighters race to strengthen containment lines before another heatwave arrives later this week.
The next round of US brokered talks between Israel and Lebanon will be held in Rome next week. Technical teams will discuss expanding the pilot zone in southern Lebanon, resolving border disputes, and advancing the implementation of last month's framework agreement. The deal outlines a phased Israeli withdrawal linked to the Lebanese army taking control of vacated areas and the disarmament of armed groups, including Hezbollah. The US says the pilot zone has made encouraging progress and remains the basis for future steps towards a broader peace and security agreement. At least one gunshot was fired outside the US consulate in Toronto on Monday. Police found evidence that a firearm had been discharged outside the embassy. According to police, a white saloon car with no number plates fled the scene. No one was injured and police have launched an investigation. This is the second shooting outside the building in the past 4 months. A tornado has caused widespread damage in the US state of Wisconsin, leaving thousands of people without electricity. Strong winds swept through eastern Wisconsin on Monday. The city of Menasha was among the hardest hit. Local authorities have declared a state of emergency. Officials have urged residents to stay indoors because of downed power lines and other hazards. Emergency shelters have been opened for affected residents. Trade tensions between China and the United States are back in focus after Beijing responded to Washington's latest tariff measures. China says it's prepared to keep talking while reserving the right to take further measures.
The United States has imposed new Section 301 tariffs on 60 economies, including China, prompting Beijing to call for the measures to be scrapped. China's Ministry of Commerce said the tax hikes were imposed under what it described as the pretext of forced labor and urged Washington to remove them. A ministry spokesperson said China has consistently opposed forced labor and has established what Beijing described as a comprehensive legal and regulatory framework to prevent and combat the practice. The spokesperson also accused the United States of long manipulating the forced labor issue, describing the latest Section 301 investigation and tariffs as a typical act of unilateralism and protectionism. According to the ministry, the United States committed during bilateral economic and trade consultations that any replacement tariffs on Chinese goods would not exceed 20%. Beijing said the current replacement tax hikes stand at 12.5% and that China's countermeasures against earlier US tariffs remain in effect. The spokesperson said China would continue to monitor subsequent US moves, conduct a full assessment of developments, and reserves the right to take all necessary measures. Despite the criticism, Beijing says it remains willing to continue dialogue and consultations with the United States on the basis of mutual respect, equality, and mutual benefit. It also called on both sides to uphold the consensus reached during economic and trade consultations and expand cooperation to help build what it described as a constructive bilateral relationship of strategic stability. The latest exchange comes as the Trump administration also threatens new tariffs on Canadian goods, widening trade tensions with major US trading partners.
Peru's President-elect Fujimori is set to be sworn in on Tuesday, becoming the first woman elected by popular vote to lead the country. Fujimori won a closely contested runoff against leftist rival Roberto Sanchez, securing a narrow victory after a 22-day vote review process. Her inauguration marks the end of a lengthy political journey, including 3 previous presidential bids and years of legal challenges. Fujimori takes office as Peru faces concerns over crime, economic uncertainty, and political divisions. Chad has begun the formal process of withdrawing from the International Criminal Court, becoming the 5th country to take the step in recent months. The move adds to mounting pressure on the court as it searches for a new chief prosecutor. Chad accused the ICC of disproportionately targeting non-Western countries, following similar withdrawal moves by Venezuela, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. The departures come after 82 of the court's 125 member states voted to dismiss Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan over serious misconduct. He denies any wrongdoing. A vote for a replacement is not expected before the new year. Legal experts warn possible US sanctions could make it harder to attract strong candidates. A deadly attack on a village in Nigeria's Kaduna state has left at least 30 people dead. Residents say the gunmen struck overnight. Local authorities said the armed men stormed a village shortly before midnight, opening fire and setting homes ablaze. Officials said that at least 30 people were killed, including 8 children, while several others were injured. Residents say women, children and elderly people were among the victims, and that security personnel arrived hours after the attackers fled. We're going to go to a quick break now, and when we return, I'll discuss the key regional headlines, and I'll be joined by a guest to dig into those stories. Stay with us. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me this morning. Let's return to the region now, and Azerbaijan's Media Development Agency has announced restrictions on the activities of 2 Iranian state media outlets, citing what it describes as reciprocal measures. The decision follows Iran's designation of several foreign media outlets, including Azerbaijan's state broadcaster AzTV, as hostile media organisations. The agency said the move is based on Azerbaijan's media law, which permits reciprocal restrictions when another country limits the activities of Azerbaijani journalists. It also accused the 2 Iranian outlets of acting against Azerbaijan's national interests. Well, joining us now to discuss relations between Iran and Azerbaijan in more detail is Professor Orkhan Valiev from Tehran University. Thank you for joining me this morning. Now, could you talk us through that latest challenge that Iran and Azerbaijan relations is facing?
Actually, I think it's not surprise for us, because we this is a brief historical overview. Iran's position during at the first Karabakh War, when at 20% territory of Azerbaijan was invaded, and during the second Karabakh War, when Azerbaijan invaded its invaded territories, Iran positioned itself in the wrong way. So therefore, I think it's not a surprise. However, as you emphasized, it is the issue of the reciprocity that theoretically they use the same the process of the 2 Iranian the media outlets. However, it's proportional reactions that Azerbaijan television, state television, that how to say, has included hostile media outlets. But Azerbaijan, I think, it is just the issue of
sorry there, Professor Valiev, we're struggling to hear you. Is there any way you could adjust your microphone? We're gonna carry on with the interview. Hopefully the sound we're able to fix the sound. Why did Iran's Ministry of Intelligence designate a number of Azerbaijani media outlets as hostile media organizations?
Actually, we don't have the direct information from their perspective. It was the motivation to include Azerbaijan state television among the hostile outlets. However, it is clear that Iran positioned itself in the wrong way again to the second Karabakh War, including the Azerbaijan state television among the hostile the media.
Many apologies, Professor Valiev. We appear to be struggling to hear you, so we're going to have to leave the interview there. But as always, thank you very much for joining us on the programme, and I'm sure we'll have you back on to provide your analysis on this topic. Now, Iran has strongly condemned Ukraine's deadly strike at a commercial ship in the Caspian Sea as an illegitimate act of aggression. Tehran rejects Kyiv's claim on linking it to the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. A-News' Taras Shiralilu reports from Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Iranian Foreign Ministry slammed Ukraine's attack on a cargo ship in the Caspian Sea, which claimed the life of one sailor and left several seamen wounded. A spokesman, Ismail Baghai, said Ukraine's move was illegitimate and contrary to the United Nations Charter and international accords. He added that other littoral states have also expressed their deep concern. He stressed to Kyiv that Iran will respond appropriately. Speaking at a weekly press conference on Monday, the Iranian official also urged the government of Bulgaria to reconsider its decision to allow U.S. military to use its airports. He said that Tehran has been aware of Sofia's role in supporting the U.S. military, warning that it will turn Bulgaria to an accomplice in the Israeli-U.S. war crimes. He was asked about London's agreement to allow U.S. B-1 bombers to launch attacks on Iran last week. Baghai said the new UK government is endangering the regional security. He said if the British government is concerned about the status of the Strait of Hormuz, it should understand that the waterway was open prior to the Israeli-U.S. war on Iran. The Iranian official also confirmed that Tehran and Muscat at the weekend discussed how best to manage the strait, as both countries are on either side of the corridor. A spokesman Baghai also announced that the French ambassador to Tehran was summoned to the foreign ministry on Sunday to express Iran's strong protest over undiplomatic activities of its embassy staff. He also criticized Washington for what he called a double standard in dealing with Iran's civilian nuclear program after its deal with Saudi Arabia, stressing that Tehran will never forego its rights under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Turaj Shiralilu from Iran's Foreign Ministry for A News.
Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev says freezing the conflict between Russia and Ukraine could create an opportunity to end the fighting. Speaking during talks with Russia's Vladimir Putin in Omsk, Tokayev said the two sides should return to negotiations under an updated version of the Istanbul framework, but he ruled out Kazakhstan acting as a mediator. Our correspondent Friza Kalimurzina has more.
Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha has thanked Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev for urging Russian President Vladimir Putin to stop the war. He shared his response in a post on X, describing it as a realistic, timely and wise message. He was referring to remarks Tokayev made on the 25th of July during talks with Vladimir Putin in Omsk. The Kazakh president said he had viewed it not as a civil war but as an interstate conflict from the very beginning. He also stressed that Kazakhstan respects the Ukrainian people, their culture and their language. Tokayev proposed considering a freeze in the conflict and the return to a renewed Istanbul formula. He said previous talks in Istanbul had produced significant results. And according to Tokayev, the next step could be a peace agreement backed by guarantees from the major powers. The Kazakh president also stressed that Kazakhstan does not intend to act as a mediator. He added that no one knows how to resolve the conflict because the parties continue to hold different positions. Tokayev described the freeze in the conflict as a mechanism that has been used in international practice before. However, the Kremlin rejected Tokayev's proposal. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that, according to Putin, freezing the conflict was impossible given Ukraine's stance. He added that Moscow intends to achieve its stated objectives. Peskov also said the fighting could end before the end of the day if the Ukrainian side made what he described as the necessary decisions. Friza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
The United States Ambassador to Turkey, Tom Barrack, says he held a productive meeting with Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan about bilateral cooperation in regional issues. In a post on X, Barak said Washington values its partnership with Turkey and will continue working with Ankara on shared challenges and opportunities. No other details were revealed about the meeting. As well as being US ambassador to Turkey, Barak is also special envoy for Syria and Iraq. Turkey says the United States has approved the export of engines from its homegrown Kan fighter jet, a move that could signal a thaw in defence relations between the two NATO allies after years of tension. Washington, however, has yet to publicly confirm the decision. Adam Morrow reports from Istanbul.
Turkey says the United States has approved the export of General Electric F-110 engines for serial production of its domestically produced Kan fifth-generation fighter jet. If confirmed, the move could mark a significant step in improving defense ties between the two NATO allies. The announcement was made over the weekend by Turkish Aerospace CEO Mehmet Demirolu at the Farnborough International Air Show in the United Kingdom. Demirolu said Washington had cleared the export of the US-made engines following a review process, removing a key obstacle that had clouded the future of Turkey's flagship combat aircraft program. US authorities, however, have yet to verify the approval, and neither the State Department nor the Pentagon has issued an official statement. But if confirmed, the decision would be one of the clearest signs yet that defense cooperation between Washington and Ankara is beginning to thaw after years of friction. Relations deteriorated in 2019 when Turkey purchased the Russian-made S-400 air defense system, despite repeated objections from the United States. Washington responded by imposing sanctions on Turkey's defense procurement agency and expelling Ankara from a US-led multinational F-35 fighter jet program. US officials argue that operating the S-400 alongside the F-35 could compromise the aircraft's sensitive technology. Although the sanctions remain in place, bilateral defense ties have shown signs of improvement in recent months. Washington has approved the sale of F-16 fighter jets to Turkey, while President Donald Trump has signaled his willingness to readmit Turkey to the F-35 program if outstanding issues involving the S-400 are resolved. If confirmed by Washington, the reported engine approval would mark another milestone in what appears to be a slow but steady reset of US-Turkey defense ties. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has met Jordan's Foreign Minister in Amman for talks on regional developments. The discussions covered Gaza, Syria and wider regional security. Both sides called for more humanitarian aid to Gaza, continued support for UNRWA and efforts to prevent further escalation. They also reaffirmed support for Syria's sovereignty, unity and reconstruction. The meeting followed Guterres' weekend trip to Syria, the first by a serving UN chief since 2009. Ruben Vardanyan's name has resurfaced in a new Russian court case, renewing scrutiny of a career spanning high finance, regional politics and criminal proceedings. The latest development adds another chapter to a record already marked by offshore networks and serious allegations.
Russia's Supreme Court has prohibited the transfer of funds to DigiMarket, a $35 million offshore company linked to Ruben Vardanyan. DigiMarket provided financing for the DoubleTree by Hilton hotel project in Moscow. In the spring of 2026, it was transferred to Russia's special offshore zone in Kaliningrad. On July 24th, ownership of the company was transferred to Vardanyan's wife, Veronika Zonabend. The decision comes as legal proceedings continue over efforts to recover more than 5 billion rubles, or around $64 million, from the borrowing company. The case has brought fresh attention to Vardanyan's long-standing links to offshore finance. Those links stretch back nearly 2 decades to Troika Dialogue, the investment bank he founded. The company later came under scrutiny in an investigation by an international investigative groups. According to reports, some of the offshore companies used proxy owners to conceal their true beneficiaries. The network moved billions of dollars out of Russia and was also used to launder criminal proceeds and hide their origins. Investigations also showed that Vardanyan and members of his family received money through the network. More than $3.2 million reportedly covered payments on Vardanyan's American Express card. Money also went to accounts belonging to his wife and family and paid school fees for his 3 children in Great Britain. Vardanyan denied direct involvement. He said the offshore companies created by Troika served his own businesses as well as the bank's clients. Further questions later emerged over Solvay Investment Group, a Swiss-based mining and metallurgy company. Vardanyan later moved from Russian finance into regional politics. In 2022, he renounced his Russian citizenship and relocated to Karabakh. He became state minister of the so-called unrecognized Nagorno-Karabakh Republic. According to Azerbaijani security services, Vardanyan facilitated the funding and operations of illegal armed groups in the region. He was later brought to trial in Baku. The Baku military court sentenced Vardanyan to 20 years in prison. He was convicted under several articles of Azerbaijan's criminal code. The charges included crimes against peace and humanity, war crimes, terrorism, and the financing of terrorism.
Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has asked President Putin to help resolve issues linked to Russian restrictions on Armenian exports. The measures have affected key Armenian exports, including food, drinks, and agricultural products. During the call, Pashinyan said the restrictions contradicted the legal framework governing Armenia and Russia relations and Eurasian Economic Union relations. The European Union has also pledged 18 million euros as part of a 52 million euro package announced in early June and eased export rules for Armenian goods. Credit ratings agency Moody's has reaffirmed SOCAR's investment-grade credit rating, giving it a stable outlook and maintaining the rating the company first secured in 2025. The decision comes despite global economic uncertainty, geopolitical tensions, and energy market volatility, reinforcing investor confidence and strengthening SOCAR's position in international capital markets.
We are pleased that Moody's has reaffirmed SOCAR's Baa3 long-term issuer rating with a stable outlook, confirming the company's investment-grade credit profile maintained since its initial upgrade last year. The decision provides further evidence of SOCAR's financial resilience, solid credit profile, and strong standing as a reliable partner in international capital markets. It also reflects international recognition of the company's long-term financial discipline, prudent financial policy, and the measures implemented to support sustainable development.
Azerbaijan has officially launched preparations to host the inaugural FIFA Under-15s World Cup and Festival in 2026. FIFA's Council Bureau selected Azerbaijan to host the first ever edition of the tournament, which will take place in October this year. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev signed a decree outlining the measures needed to organise the tournament, assigning the existing committee for the 2027 FIFA Under-20s World Cup to oversee preparations for the new event. The event marks a new addition to FIFA's youth competitions and is expected to bring together some of the world's most promising young footballers. In Georgia, the country's former parliament building has been given a new life. It now houses a technology hub opened this week by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Economy. Our reporter Nini Nikolaishvili has more from Tbilisi.
Prime Minister Irakli Kabakhidze and Economy Minister Mariam Krivishvili cut the ribbon on the new technology hub in Kutaisi, set fittingly inside the building that once held Georgia's parliament. Old walls, new purpose. Inside, an AI computing center, a science and technology museum, and a branch of TUMO, the creative tech education network already running in more than 20 countries. There is also a technopark, Georgia's largest, built to run incubators, hackathons, and training programs non-stop all year. Economy Minister Krivishvili framed it as a statement of intent. Georgia, she said, doesn't just want to use new technology, it wants to build it. And Kutaisi, she argued, has already earned the spot, a working international airport, a young university, and now this. It is a local story, but it lends against a much bigger backdrop. Separately, Georgia has spent years chasing a bigger ambition, turning itself into a digital hub linking Europe and Asia with plans for submarine data cables tying the two continents together. The Kutaisi hub is not formally part of that connectivity push, but both point in the same direction. A country betting that geography plus a bit of infrastructure adds up to relevance. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
And finally this morning, Afghanistan and Uzbekistan have reaffirmed their commitment to expanding economic cooperation after Uzbekistan's Deputy Prime Minister led a senior delegation for talks in Kabul. Tamim Bahis reports.
Uzbekistan's Deputy Prime Minister Jamshed Kujayev and a high-level delegation met with Prime Minister Mohammad Hassan at the Presidential Palace in Kabul. They discussed ways to deepen cooperation across a range of sectors. According to the Prime Minister's office, Kujayev described Afghanistan as an important partner in Uzbekistan's foreign policy and said that delegation's visit was made on the instruction of President Shavkat Mirziyoyev. He said Uzbek exports to Afghanistan reached $150 million last year, while exports have already totaled $111 million in the first 4 months of the current solar year, expressing confidence that bilateral trade will continue to grow. The Uzbek Deputy Prime Minister also announced that 5,000 visas have been issued to Afghan citizens this year, with further steps underway to simplify visa procedures. Meanwhile, in separate talks, Afghanistan's Minister of Transport and Civil Aviation and his Uzbek counterpart agreed to launch the practical work of a joint technical team to improve transport links, facilitate transit and ease visa procedures for commercial drivers. Uzbekistan also pledged greater access for Afghan transit vehicles. Also, discussions with national companies and the National Development Company focused on expanding trade and investment, increasing exports of Afghan fresh fruits, advancing the Trans-Afghan project, strengthening textile industry, and supporting infrastructure development. Uzbekistan also announced plans to purchase 100,000 tons of Afghan cotton and cooperate in supplying fertilizers, improved seeds, and other agricultural support. The meeting highlighted growing economic ties between Kabul and Tashkent, with both sides pledging to strengthen trade, connectivity, and regional cooperation. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
That's all we've got time for this morning. Thank you for watching Daybreak and have a wonderful rest of your day.